Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of 10 Board Games Ranked. So in case you've missed it, I am changing the format of the show slightly, whereas instead of me kind of recapping on all the games I played during the previous month and ranking them, I'm going to be doing it for every 10 new games that I play. So that way I'll get more content of this type out there, and it'll make it a bit more consistent in terms of the quantity of games on each list, because sometimes I have months where I'll play 20 new games, sometimes it'll be 10 and so on. So this way it's going to be a bit more consistent and regular. Now before I get started on these 10 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 10, I have Echoes the Dancer. So this is a strange concept. So it's a murder mystery game that uses audio as the clue. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be scanning these game pieces, which will give you a clip of sound, which could be voices or sound effects, and then you're trying to piece together this storyline to try and solve what happened, basically. I suppose the concept is fresh and different, but I think in practice it was quite annoying because you sometimes forget what one clip was and then you'd have to scan it again and again and again. So it became quite tedious, and I also thought that the voice acting was a bit cringy and a bit too try-hardish. So yeah, this was not for me at all, and I thought it was quite bad. So that is Echoes the Dancer. At number 9, I have Dice Topia. So this is a little filler dice drafting game as you're taking dice from this communal board and putting them on your own player board. The higher pips are going to give you more points. However, you do have personal objectives that you're trying to aim towards as well. The game was fine, and I quite like this idea of when you draft dice from the board, you put down a control marker there, which will compete for area majorities from where you took the dice from. That was quite cool, and some conflicting mechanisms there. But the big death knell for this one was the fact that it was not colourblind friendly at all. Myself and my brother are quite severely colourblind, and two of the dice colours were completely undecipherable from each other. You could not tell them apart, so therefore the game was pretty much unplayable for me. And for that reason, Dice Topia came in at number 9. At number 8, I have The King's Dilemma. So this is a game I've been wanting to play for a long time now, because the concept of this game is right up my alley, as you are these kind of heads of these noble families trying to advise the king on what to do in certain situations. Now you've all got your own wants and needs and what you're trying to achieve, and that is represented through the use of this kind of tug of war board where you're moving these tokens up and down to try and manipulate the board state to your needs. Now I've always been apprehensive about trying this one because although I love the theme and setting and the concept of it, I was kind of concerned how that was going to blend with the mechanical side of the game. And I think after a couple of plays, my concerns are right, because the gameplay is quite weak, to be honest. Despite the storyline being relatively interesting and some conundrums coming up, I think it would have been a better game if it would completely threw the mechanisms out the window and just said, you know what, play a role-playing game to try and overcome these scenarios and what would happen. So yeah, I think sometimes it's trying to be too many different things at times, and with tug-of-war games in general, I find them quite annoying because there's only a few objectives going around there. I want all these tokens to be at the top, you want them to be at the bottom, so obviously we're going to vote on opposite things, and it's going to be back and forth all the time. So yeah, unfortunately, these first few plays have not kind of reassured me on how the game is going to play out, but we are going to play it a few more times to see what happens and what could potentially be added in terms of mechanisms to hopefully make it a bit more gamified. But we shall see. But right now, I'm not impressed, and The King's Dilemma comes in at number 8. At number 7, I have Stevenson's Rocket. Now I have to say this was a bit of a disappointment for me because it's quite rare that I don't like a Reiner Knizia design. Now I'm not saying this is bad, but it certainly is not for me. So this is kind of an entry-level 18xx style game as you are investing in these different train lines, getting shares in them, and you're going to be extending the tracks, trying to make them reach new cities, scoring in different ways. Now, in theory, I should like that style of gameplay, but in practice, the game was quite slow, plodding, and even annoying at times, because if you wanted to do a simple action to extend a railway line, you had to go through this whole process of allowing the other players the opportunity to veto what you've just done. And when you want to do that, each time you play the game, every single turn, you can probably imagine it does start to get quite frustrating. So unfortunately, I think I'd rather play something a bit more straightforward when it comes to this kind of route building. Just stick to something simple like, Babylonia or Blue Lagoon or Through the Desert. This one was just had a bit too much tacked on and tried too hard to be like a shares style game. So yeah, for me, I would rather keep those two aspects of the gameplay separate, play those other games I've mentioned, and if I want to play a simple stocks and share style game, I'll probably lean towards something like Acquire. So yeah, definitely did not see the need to play this one any further. I thought the other players I played it with clearly were not enjoying it either, so therefore this one is going to have to go, and it was not a hit, despite not being a bad game objectively. So that is Stevenson's Rocket. At number 6, I have Splendor Duel. So this is the 2-player only version of the classic game Splendor. This one has Bruno Cathala as a co-designer, who obviously had amazing success with putting the 2-player version out of Seven Wonders with Seven Wonders Duel. So for that reason, I was quite intrigued to see the changes in this one. And to be honest, I think the changes were all for the better, as the way you drafted the tokens were a lot more interesting as you took them from this grid. It had some variable scoring as well, rather than racing for those scoring, just overall scoring. You could race for these crowns, or you could even race to have all scoring in a certain column. So I like that you were fighting on multiple fronts rather than just one. Again, made you a little bit more on your toes and be a bit more cautious about what your opponent was doing. Now, despite all the minor changes for the better with this one, I do feel like I personally struggled to why you would pick this one up, because the changes weren't that much better than the original one, because the original Splendor was actually quite a good game at 2 players, and of course you have that versatility of being able to play it with 3 or 4 players. And to be honest, in general, I wasn't a huge fan of Splendor anyway. I like the design, I think it's a very well put together game, but it felt a little bit too clinical and a bit too sterile for me, I suppose. So yeah, this was just more of the same. Certainly an objectively good game. I can certainly see why it's so popular, but it just needs a little bit more flavour for me personally. I needed something else going on rather than feeling so procedural and it feels like a bit of a grind at times. So that is Splendor Duel at number 6. At number 5, I have Hare and Tortoise, which is probably the biggest surprise of the month. And that is mainly due to the fact that this game came out in the 1970s. So naturally, I think us as modern day gamers feel a little bit cynical when games like this come out. You think, it's going to be bad, but let's get on with it and get it over with. And it turns out there's actually some pretty cool things going on here. Now, I believe this game was one of the first games out there that did not use dice as a moving mechanism. You were trying to race to the finish, but you do that by managing this hand of carrots, which is basically your currency. And the more carrots you collect and the more you spend, the further you can move. But you want to be making sure you're making tactical decisions to kind of keep a smooth flow of carrots in your hand. So in certain points in the game, you might want to be in certain positions, or you might want to fall back to collect more carrots as you go. And there's also this other cool twist where you needed to have below a certain amount of carrots and had to shed these, I think it's lettuce or cabbages, at certain points on the map to be able to finish in the first place. So there are more tactical decisions that came into play here. Now, I'm not saying this game is great. It's certainly adequate and it holds up quite well considering how old it is. This is 50 years old now. And I think maybe a big part of it finishing relatively respectable, in terms of being in 5th position for the episode, was due to the fact that it was way better than I thought it was going to be. And I would play it again. So that is Hare and Tortoise at number 5. At number 4, I have Gift of Tulips. So this is a recently fulfilled Kickstarter card game, pretty light in its rule set, and it has some commodity speculation going on here as you are playing cards into the centre, or the market, I suppose, to kind of boost the different suits that you want to aim towards. So if you keep on playing cards to the market of a certain type, then that is going to be the most popular type, and therefore at the end of the game, if you have the majority of those cards in front of you, they're going to be worth more points. But of course, people are competing for these. But I do like this decision of having to draw a card and decide what you want to do with it, in terms of playing in front of yourself to try and get towards those majorities, manipulating the market by playing it face up into the market. You can play it face down on the market to try and kind of throw a spanner in the works and misguide your opponents as to what is going to be more popular, or you can even give them to your opponents. Now, if you give them to your opponents and they are one of those most popular suits, then you get quite a nice injection of points there. So you might think, you know what, you're no threat to me in this suit, so therefore I'm going to give you a boost there and get a massive bunch of points right now rather than at the end. And hopefully I still get those points at the end as well. So I actually quite like this one. I think the more I play it, the more I'm enjoying it. And I think maybe the jury is still out on how this is going to hold up after, you know, several plays, at least, you know, or as, you know, time goes by. But right now, I think it's quite a clean game with some pretty cool decisions going on here, especially regarding, you know, keeping cards or giving them away. At number 3, I have Heat, Pedal to the Metal. So this is a very popular racing game, definitely blew up last year and into 2023. And this is kind of the newer version of Flamme Rouge, which is a racing game I already enjoyed, but this one is based on the kind of 1960s era of Formula One. And it has a lot of shared mechanisms as Flamme Rouge, as you are managing this hand of cards. But instead of getting exhaustion cards in this one, you are managing your heat supply by not going too fast around corners and stuff like that. So it really is a game you have to manage these cards quite carefully by kind of flipping up and down gears as you go. You know, the higher gears you're in, you can play more cards, go faster on those straights, but they're going to be a real nightmare on the corners because you're going to be overspilling in terms of how fast you go. But the lower gears are great because, of course, they give you more control going around the corners, and they'll also let you shed those heat cards from your hand, which are basically just clog up your hand, doing no good. I thought this game was way better than I thought it was going to be. I think the first time I played it, I thought I preferred the cleanness and the simplicity of Flamme Rouge, but the more I played this one, I thought, you know what, I think these changes are actually for the better and add a bit more meat onto the bones. So I can certainly see why this one's doing well. I think it's going to hold up for a long time to come, and I'm going to fit that nice niche of being accessible, but certainly not silly, and having good, having a good degree of decisions to be made. So that is Heat, Pedal to the Metal. Okay, so let's get into the top 2 games, and this is where my commendations are going to begin. And we're going to start with another Knizia game. At number 2, we have Quo Vadis. So Quo Vadis is actually pretty unlike any other Knizia game that I've played, because I suppose the main aspect of the game is negotiation. Now what you're going to do is you're going to have this board, which is basically almost like a ladder to try and get up to this kind of main area. And what you're going to do is, in order to progress on this board, you need to cut deals with the other players. So you are lobbying for votes to progress in the Senate. You can use your own votes if you want to, but sometimes that's not going to be an option. But whenever you give your vote away, you get points. And whenever you move forward on this kind of track, you are collecting these points along the way as well. So it's always about trying to broker what is going to benefit you. But the twist of the game is that if you do not make it to that final Senate, then you are not going to be eligible for scoring at all. So you're always going to have to be aware about what you're giving and hopefully gaining more than you are giving away. Tons of scope for creating deals here. I think I've barely scratched the surface really. I haven't played it at the higher player count yet, as in being 5 players, and I think it's going to shine at that player count. But even at that lower player count of 3 or 4 players, it still works really well, especially if you start adding in these new rules, which are going to be used in the kind of new Kickstarter version of this, Quo Vadis. You can easily just use those rules in terms of having neutral player pieces on the board and being able to bribe them. So I think the game is really clever. I don't have anything quite like it in my collection, and it works at a really zippy pace. And it's actually a little bit chess-like in the way you orienteer this board and try to line up not only what you need now, but what you need in the future, because you can start pushing towards other little holding areas, and hopefully you get the majority there and can just help yourself without the need of anybody else. So yeah, really clever game, and I really advise you check it out if you do like those really interactive, negotiation style ones. So yeah, this is Quo Vadis. And finally, at number 1, and hands down my favourite game out of these 10, this is Sperium. So Sperium is quite a fascinating game. It's almost worker placement in its mechanisms, but not quite, as you do not have a communal board. You have a bunch of cards out there. I think it's a 3x3 grid of cards, and you're not placing your workers on the cards to acquire them. You're actually placing them in the gaps between the cards, meaning you're eligible to score or to acquire the adjacent cards to your meeples. But it has this kind of chicken mechanism where the more popular a card is, the more expensive it's going to be. But instead of buying the card, you can remove your worker and gain coins equal to the other people surrounding that cards. And because money is so tight in this game, that is quite a conundrum. And it's all about when to bite the bullet and kind of knowing what you're willing to pay for that card before the other players jump in there. And then these cards are going to do a ton of different things, such as giving you one-off abilities, increasing your income each round, getting these buildings which will give you these cool conversion ratios in terms of cashing in this resource to get points or money. Really interesting. It has a great progression to it, as I think it's only 5 rounds, and every couple of rounds the cards get better and better. And I was very impressed about how smooth this played. That core mechanism of surrounding the cards was fascinating to me. And yeah, really enjoyed it, right up my alley in terms of like a 60-minute Euro with loads of crunchy decisions to be made. Yeah, this is my kind of game. And it goes to show I'm still loving these games published by Astari many years ago. So yeah, hands down my favourite game, that is Sperium. So there we have it, that concludes the video. Hopefully you've enjoyed this new format and will continue to do so as I get more of these videos out there, and hopefully it will give me an opportunity to catch up through my shelf of shame and really push through them. But if you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel. And for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.